The wind pierces your back like 1,000 tiny moths batting their icy wings under your coat against your bare flesh. They propel you forth through the glowing threshold of the open door and into the combative warmth. A wooden room stretches out before you, wooden meaning the floor and ceiling match in their natural pattern of planks, like twin maples that were logged and slivered. The wide-mouthed hearth dances steadily and projects a floating orange aura onto the little bistro tables and matching chairs. The space was wide but felt compact, with patrons occupying tables and grazing on little bowls of nuts and pretzels. An old man sat alone with a packet of papers, scribbling in words and stopping to reread them. A group of men shared a table with the foamy mugs and deep-bellied chuckles that punctuated the soft chatter. 2 women sat side by side, gazing into the fire and exchanging a quiet conversation. You make your way to the counter, where a few men and a couple ladies sit on stools facing the waitress. As you claim an empty stool, the young woman glances up from her cooler of sodas and sends you a knowing smile. She must have noticed your ruddy cheeks and quivering hands, because without saying a thing, she slides you a foamy mug. Upon hearing me describe this image, what did you think of? Was it a restaurant, a cafe, maybe a diner? Many would say I've described a pub or a bar, but why? I didn't tell you that it was a pub or a bar, nor did I mention alcohol. Since the ancient inception of the beer industry, recorded as long ago as the 10th and 11th centuries, alcoholic beverages have held their place firmly in society. Whether for religious, ceremonial, or traditional reasons, we are all familiar with the ritualistic raise of a spirited glass and then the simultaneous gulp. However, relating to the marketability of alcoholic products, a strange yet calculated path has formed and continues today on the trajectory of its values. Why do beer posters exist? Why are advertisements for beer so entwined with masculinity? How has the beer industry shifted to appeal to customers today? Let us retrace our steps all the way back to the beginning, wherein such inquiries of history, laws, advertisements, and controversies can be explored. Let us uncover the fascinating history of beer advertisements.
Morena, dale con tu técnica que yo tengo tu táctica. Dale vos te acepta la automática. Yo soy tu mami, tú eres mi lunática. Dale morena que tú eres mi psicótica. Morena ya no escucho tus signos vitales. Pa' que fronteaste con los anormales. Está buscando que el moreno te acorrale. Y ya tú sabes, dale.
While brewing beer can be traced to the Middle Ages of Western Europe, it has been a practice long utilized by ancient civilizations of East Asia, the Middle East, and Northern Africa. As civilization gradually expanded across the West, naturally, so did the practice of brewery. Variations of ale and wine emerged as new resources became available and others dissipated. However, no matter where civilization boomed across the Western continent, alcoholic beverages were far more common than water. The consumption of spirits was heavily integrated into these ancient societies, and even more so with religion. Convents and monasteries were often the primary brewers across the West, and many of these practices sculpted parts of ancient religions such as Judaism and Christianity. As both the popularity and variety of brewing expanded, homemade beer and wine became accessible to almost anyone with a pair of hands and a thirst for spirits. Ale was more common than water for all social classes during the Middle Ages, as water was usually unsafe to drink and coffee and tea had not yet reached the West. As the variations, recipes, and intricacies of crafting alcoholic beverages expanded across countries and cultures, the monetary value of specific products rose. With advancing technologies and resources becoming available to creatives, monumental improvements were made to the processes of making and qualifying beverages. As most practices did during the Industrial Revolution, the art of brewery became more efficient and global than ever before. While traditional European brewers would usually dip their fingers into a boiling pot of ale to gauge the process of their creation, industrial brewsters, I've been saying brewers, but I guess it's brewsters anyways, began using thermometers in 1760 and the hydrometer in 1770. While fermented brews quenched the thirst and fueled the lives of centuries of people, beer and ale solidified themselves as the cornerstone of culture as their reach became widespread. As the spread of alcoholic beverages integrated further into society, so did the discussion surrounding the effects it had on the public. Movements and laws limiting or banning alcohol consumption hindered the productivity of breweries. However, even the American Prohibition of the 1920s could not totally deter the long-standing importance of alcohol. New styles, methods, and distributors emerged and infiltrated Western culture, especially in the young country of the United States. Alcoholic innovations continue to be born across the world, as do the discussions surrounding the culture of it. While alcohol has been a large part of the global diet for centuries, the social opinion on its consumption has certainly affected chunks of its history. In ancient Middle Eastern and Mediterranean cultures, early restriction of alcoholic consumption could be linked to class disparities, as wine was a delicacy and more often consumed by the wealthy. Later, during the Middle Ages of Europe, laws on breweries were implemented, such as a required brewery license and legal guidelines for pricing beverages. Also, since medieval governments were typically synonymous with Christianity in Western Europe, social expectations of abstaining from alcohol on Sundays became real laws. Stricter rules impacted hours of operations for pubs and tolerance for public drunkenness. Throughout history, the majority of alcoholic restrictions stem from the societal and cultural beliefs. Even after medieval times, persisting into the 17th, 18th, and 19th centuries, such blue laws dictated the public's opinion of alcohol. As defined by the National Alcoholic Beverage Control Association, the term blue law refers to any restriction or ban on specific activities on a certain day, usually but not limited to Sundays. As mentioned earlier, alcoholic consumption was typically governed by societal standards and suggestions. This principle has been carried throughout history and continues to affect the way society handles alcohol today. This is exhibited in the 1961 case of McGowan versus Maryland, which decided that a local law could ban the sale of alcoholic beverages on Sunday, stating that, quote, the purpose behind the law was the health, safety, recreation, and general well-being, unquote, of all people regardless of their religious affiliation. Whether for religious reasons or simply attempts to protect public well-being, the issue of alcohol consumption has been discussed amongst both the public and the courts since its inception. However, brewing culture has never been one to be ashamed of itself and integrates its own taboo perception into its identity. As all products that became profitable to a greater market of goods, the necessity for adequate advertisements began alcohol's history of marketing. Rewinding back to the more primal days of alcohol sales, breweries were often marked by dried bush hanging above the door, indicating that the brewster no longer needed it to ferment and the ale was ready to be bought and served. Later on, depending on the location, beer advertisements were simple and straightforward, with simple drawings of a foamy mug or an etching declaring, "We have beer." It wasn't until the 19th century that more complex and creative signage emerged, with the Industrial Revolution introducing the lithograph, which enabled metal to be etched and designed. As technology advanced into the early 20th century, neon signs became synonymous with beer advertisements. The marketing of beer had historically been positioned to target the male customer rather than the female. One could attribute this by going all the way back to the Middle Ages, wherein the patriarchal structure of society allowed men to spend the family's extra money at pubs and distilleries rather than women. Furthermore, beer tends to be associated with strong, tough, even heroic masculinity for its bitter taste and risk of causing inhibition. Consequently, themes and motifs within the marketing of beer companies are created by and for men, which is a difficult thing to deny even today. Fantastical elements such as angels, mermaids, ogres, gnomes, dreamt up by artists or boosters were incorporated into earlier forms of branding, as well as ideological beings such as huge brawny men and curvy sultry women. Such motifs were attractive and bought into by male customers, which only further cemented these common themes for centuries to come. Whether fairy or farm girl, women have been a constant motif in alcoholic advertisements. Appealing to the straight male fantasy of a docile, sexual woman, while also grabbing the attention of anyone who came across a bottle, poster, or label, the use of women to solicit beer was an obvious choice for the mostly male customers. Budweiser, St. Pauli, Corona, Miller, and many others are notorious for their eccentric posters of women in flimsy bikinis or tight leotards cradling a big bottle of beer, or at least the arm of a man drinking one. The explicit nature of beer marketing began mainly in the late 30s and 40s as the Second World War came to an end and the American prohibition was no longer in effect. Such raunchy or taboo advertisements also became integrated within American identity as they broke barriers and elicited a patriotic sentiment amongst our rapidly changing country. While not all beer art was outwardly suggestive or sensual, women were also often posed in a dress, apron, and holding a tray of open beer bottles to be served. As Jess Keller Poole wrote in her article, Bottoms Up, Consuming the Femme Body, even when print ads weren't using female sexuality to sell, they were using the female figure in the heteronormative expectation of what a woman represents to sell beer. This meant hosting a party, greeting her husband upon his arrival home from work, or generally functioning as the caretaker of the home and family. The underlying vulgarity and sexism prevalent in these ads continued onwards into the 80s, 90s, and early 2000s. Personally, as a child that grew up during the 2010s, I have my own memories of beer ads I would see as I accompanied my father to the liquor store. I vividly remember seeing a blonde woman in a push-up bra and cut-off jean shorts, holding forth an open can of local beer and gleaming a dazzling smile. Simple advertisements and posters, while quite effective, were not the only form of marketing the beer industry utilized. Going further into the importance of the American identity after World War II, baseball was a cultural touchstone of the 40s and 50s. Companies took advantage of the intersection between sports and refreshments, integrating beer into sponsorships and endorsements among baseball broadcasts and airings. Further on, major beer companies began sponsoring popular players, as Philip Morris was sponsored by Miller, and Walter O'Malley was sponsored by Schaefer. Beer companies also funded games or supplied alcohol at a discount in exchange for sports announcers to advertise their beverages, and hang posters all over the stadium displaying their product. Beer companies also went as far as purchasing stadiums and teams. Even today, we see the Red Sox are sponsored by Samuel Adams and Budweiser, the Knicks being sponsored by Michelob Ultra, and Dodgers being sponsored by Estrella Jalisco. Similar endorsements exist within American football culture, but indisputably arose from the MLB's association with the beer industry. Departing from professional athletes, the beer industry has also been known to endorse celebrities, actors, and even influencers. Throughout the past decade, you may have noticed your favorite TV personality or Hollywood star promoting their own beer brands or collaborations with larger companies. Celebrities that have partnered with brands to create their own version of their product to appeal to that celebrity's fans include Lenny Bruce, Bryan Cranston, Jimmy Buffett, Kelsey Grammer, and more. Celebrities that have their own alcohol brands include Blake Lively, Kendall Jenner, Ryan Reynolds, George Clooney, Rita Ora, Bruno Mars, and even former President Obama. While these endorsements and ventures don't directly relate to the controversy and deep-rooted ideals of the beer industry itself, they do underscore the scope that it has on our culture. The combination of beer's controversial past in society and the vast economic empire it boasts renders it inevitable that some of their ads will be disputed. However, there have been some landmark cases that stain the history of beer advertisements and inspire company-wide changes. Underlying tones of sexism and misogyny are the main culprits that are included in beer advertisements and unsettle the public. Especially as society progressed and feminist beliefs were integrated, the constant objectification of women by these companies began receiving backlash from the masses.
There are 2 rules to remember if you want to have a good time. Rule number 1, never run out of Colt 45. Rule number 2, never forget rule number 1. You want to know why you should keep plenty of Colt 45 on hand? You never know when friends might show up. I don't claim you can have a better time with Colt 45 than without it. But why take chances?
The power of Colt 45. It works every time.
In one instance, during the mid-1980s, the beer brand Colt 45 ran an ad with renowned actor Billy D. Williams of Star Wars. He played Lando Calrissian. In the ads, Williams is seen cracking open a can of Colt 45 while speaking to a woman, then gazing into the camera and saying, "Works every time." The ads received backlash as they insinuated the act of intoxicating and taking advantage of women, and opened up conversations about the dangerous, masculine culture of alcohol consumption. This small landmark promoted change in the way beer was portrayed in the media. Additionally, multiple commercials have been under scrutiny for misogynistic undertones that alienate female drinkers and exclude women from the culture of drinking. As discussed earlier, the objectification of women has been a popular motif within beer advertisements. As of 2015, even the titles of certain products evoke sexism. The Trashy Blonde, Naughty Noel, the Mocha Muff Dive, Tramp Stamp, Leg Spreader, and many, many more. Throughout the early 2000s to today, beer posters are notorious for their array of skimpily dressed women in corsets and beer-made outfits or string bikinis enthusiastically promoting a beer bottle. The distaste among, especially the female population, has inspired change throughout the industry, leading many alcohol brands to remarket their products. In an article of The Guardian titled "Sexist Beer Ads," Alan Clark, the head of the company Sabmiller, which owns Foster's, Grolsch, and Peroni, said, "Peroni has moved away from the lager lout college frat impact. Beer has now associations with fashion, art, and design. The world has moved on from lads telling jokes on a Saturday and high-volume consumption. Beer is now drunk by women and men together." Despite budding changes in a more progressive, inclusive direction, more racy beer commercials still hold their positions within popular culture today.
Morena, dale con tu técnica que yo tengo tu táctica. Dale, vos te haces la automática. Yo soy una mami, tú eres mi lunática. Dale, morena, que tú eres mi psicótica. Morena, ya no escucho tus signos vitales. Pa' que fronteaste con los